his life down to Florida. All of his children now reside in the state of Florida. They all at one point lived in New York. David, I can tell you just as you were coming to me, I was hanging up the phone with Eric Trump, one of the president's sons, obviously, who was a part of this ruling by the judge here in New York. David, Eric Trump telling me that the ruling, in his opinion, is a total joke, called it insane, said it feels like, David, they're living in an alternate universe. And David, one of the things that Eric Trump pointed out to me just now on the phone is that, as he testified under oath, he remains and continues to stand by his testimony that he does not recall, ever believing any of the information he was signing off on was fake, was altered, was any type of scheme. So obviously, as we expected, and Eric Trump just confirmed to ABC News, the Trump family, David, is already saying they will appeal this decision by the judge, and obviously we'll have to see how quickly they move on that.
And what's their defense? I'm sure you didn't have time to get into it on the phone, but when you talk to the sons, for example, this argument from Letitia James that they were operating in some sort of alternate universe, that's the allegation here, that they were inflating assets in a way that the average American just isn't allowed to do.
Yeah, and David, their argument is that they maintain that they ran a clean business. They point to different sales and transactions they've had that have been a success. One of the things that Donald Trump and both his children have pointed out to me over the years is the recent sale he had of the old post office, David. The former president making over $400 million on that sale after he had refurbished the old post office and eventually sold it to Hilton. So that's one example they point to, David. These were properties that were sought out by others when they did sales. They also recently point to a golf course here in New York that they sold for New York residents, the one where you drive over the Whitestone Bridge. They recently sold it to one of the casino giants for, I'm told, just under $100 million, David. So that's the success that they point to. These were properties and assets people wanted, so thus, in their mind, the evaluations that they attached to them were legitimate.
One quick question, John, for you before we move on to the rest of the team here and then get it back to our stations across the country. When you're talking about $354 million in fines for just the former president alone, put this in perspective. How much money have they spent, has the former president spent on legal bills already, the number of cases that he now faces while he's running for president? And how much of this money is actually coming from people donating to the campaign, actually footing the bill for these legal bills?
David, a lot of it. I mean, if you look at calendar year 2023, when you, Aaron, I, all of us were on the air going through the series of indictments, Donald Trump was expanding how many lawyers were on his payroll. And we know, David, because of those campaign finance reports that just came out over the last couple of weeks that we reported on the show with you a few weeks ago, that Donald Trump and his team have spent over $50 million on legal fees, on attorneys. Some of the attorneys, David, that worked on this case, the New York Attorney General's case, made millions of dollars directly because of their work for Donald Trump. And you have to recognize, David, look at just the last few weeks of coverage we've been reporting here on ABC. Donald Trump's legal troubles, we know the courts at the moment, right? Manhattan, Georgia, the two federal probes. But look at just a couple weeks ago. Donald Trump's team was in New York, it was in the Supreme Court, rather, focused on the 14th Amendment appeal. New lawyers were brought on for that. Special attorneys that were barred to appear before the Supreme Court. You got to know, David, they too were dipping into the campaign cash.
Not only that, but the E. Jean Carroll case in recent weeks and the amount of money fined in that case as well. A lot of people are going to start adding up these kinds of numbers and simply ask, where is this money going to come from?
Yep. Absolutely, David. And I think that's the thing. Look at where it has happened every time Donald Trump was indicted as a key example, right? We did it together 4 times, David, on the air. Donald Trump was indicted. They came out with a statement. Shortly thereafter, an email blast came out to supporters, fundraising, trying to pull in funds. Donald Trump's team bragged about the millions of dollars they raised after each indictment. And David, that money that was raised, all 50 million of it, went to pay those bills.
John Santucci with us, John Karl, our chief Washington correspondent, also with us. And John, there was a lot of focus just on this particular case alone and Donald Trump's behavior in that courtroom, admonished by the judge, fined by the judge along the way, and it figured into this decision.
It sure did. And David, before I get to what the judge said about it, just think about it. He spent upwards of 10 days in that courtroom He testified. He would come out and give his daily press conferences. He was using the courtroom as a way to be part of his campaign. But look what the judge said about Trump's testimony in this case. Overall, Donald Trump rarely responded to the questions asked, and he frequently interjected long, irrelevant speeches on issues far beyond the scope of the trial. His refusal to answer the questions directly, or in some cases at all, severely compromised his credibility. So Donald Trump's time inside that courtroom in the midst of a presidential campaign, using it as a way to boost his political prospects, it appears hurt his legal prospects. Again, the judge saying that his testimony, very strong language here, severely compromised his credibility. And one of the things that Trump talked about constantly in those press conferences, it seemed to be fixated on, was the value of Mar-a-Lago, because he was accused of overstating the value of Mar-a-Lago and insisted that it was worth well over $1 billion. This ruling takes some time to explain why that is simply not true. The judge explains that although Trump said Mar-a-Lago was worth between $1 billion and $1.5 billion today, he said that the judge says that would require valuing it as a private residence, which the deed prohibits, and it would have to make it the most expensive private residence listed in the county, Palm Beach County, by approximately 400%. And the judge explains, and this is important with the Mar-a-Lago property. Again, I mention this because this is something Trump has been fixated about, talked about not only in his appearances outside that courtroom, but talks about it in his campaign rallies. Trump signed two agreements with the government regarding Mar-a-Lago to limit his tax exposure. One was a 1995, a deed of conservation and preservation, where he gave up the right to use Mar-a-Lago, he or any other owner, for any purposes other than a social club. And a secondary deed, another deed in 2002, where he gave away in perpetuity the right to develop or use the property as a single-family residence. So that enabled Trump to significantly lower the taxes he would pay at Mar-a-Lago, but it means you can't subdivide it and put a bunch of homes, private residence on there, which is what you would need to see the value being as high as it is. But look, bottom line, Trump has used this case and the other cases on and on and on for his campaign. But in the courtroom, the judge sticks to the rule of law, sticks to the ruling, and is saying that that Trump has actually hurt his own credibility with his own statements.
John, let's just talk bigger picture here politically, because we've seen the polling that Americans, when they're polled, who they choose, and obviously we're still far out from Election Day in the race for president, but when they talk about a conviction on some of these criminal counts, and again, this is not one of those cases. We are still awaiting the Jack Smith trial, the trial in Georgia, the hush money case here in New York. We see how the polling suddenly shifts when people are asked, would you vote for a convicted felon? Now, in this case, this deals with another part and a huge part of Donald Trump's image, which is what he's really worth, what his businesses are worth, what he's worth as someone who prides himself in decades of doing business here in New York and beyond. When you see him called out, if you will, by this judge for grossly exaggerating the value of his properties and now being held accountable. And again, the numbers here at this hour, Donald Trump has now been fined $354 million in this case. Both sons fined $4 million each, which takes you to about $362 million. Donald Trump and his two sons have been fined for exaggerating the value of their real estate. Does this poke holes in that image for those who support Donald Trump? Obviously too soon to know, but again, this is a big part of the image that he presents on the campaign trail.
Well, Trump's entire political life is an outgrowth of his contention that he is the greatest, most successful business genius, that he is fabulously wealthy because he is fabulously successful in business and would bring the same business acumen to the government. But what you're seeing here with this incredible judgment, again, accusing him, first of all, of exaggerating his wealth, but also getting to the point where there's a real question whether or not he could even pay these fines on top of the fines that he is forced to pay in the E. Jean Carroll cases, not to mention all of the legal bills which John just went through and that he is using his political fundraising to help pay for. I mean, Donald Trump's image as a incredibly successful, wealthy businessman is also very much what was on trial here and very much in question right now. Can he pay this? Now, I have to say, the other thing that strikes me here, David, is that this decision, coming so closely on the heels of the E. Jean Carroll decision, and before we get into the criminal cases, but this decision comes just as Donald Trump has solidified his almost total control over the Republican Party. He is come out and he's pushed for a replacement at the RNC. Ronna McDaniel is going to be leaving. Trump's choice to run the RNC is all but certain, likely to take over. He has said that he wants his daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, to be the co-chairman of the RNC, and has said that the purpose of the Republican Party, its entire purpose, everything that it must do, must be focused on one thing, and that is electing Donald Trump the President of the United States. Now, one question that this raises is, Donald Trump, while he was president, used the RNC to pay his legal bills. Once he became a candidate for president and wasn't the only Republican candidate, that ended because the RNC technically can't take sides in a Republican primary. But what's going to happen now? Is the Republican National Committee going to be yet another engine, an engine he may really need to help keep on top of these finances, faced with these massive fines and massive legal bills all at the same time?
You speak of this pause from the RNC during this primary process, but in the meantime, as John Santucci pointed out, John, by and large, Donald Trump supporters in the country are paying many of these legal bills for him.
I mean, it's small donors. It's it's donations that come in, often less than $100. Working class people who have taken to fully believe his argument, his contention that he is a victim of a witch hunt, that everybody is out to get him, and he says they're out to get me because their real target is you, and I'm the one standing in the way. And it's that they have raised tens of millions of dollars, and as John went through, much of that money has gone to pay Donald Trump's legal bills. But by the way, the RNC's money also comes, comes in some cases from wealthy donors, but also, comes from small-time donors, the people that you see that go to those Trump rallies and have been going for years. In many ways, those people that show up and to cheer him on at his rallies are the ones that are tapped to pay his legal bills. But now, I mean, the legal bills, as huge and massive and accumulating as they are, that's just the least of it. Now you have, this judgment, which they're going to appeal, just like they're going to appeal the latest in the E. Jean Carroll case. But this is the kind of money that could face somebody in a position like Donald Trump's to have to liquidate all of their assets to pay. Donald Trump says he is a multi-billionaire. Well, he's going to need to be to pay what he's being fined here.
Yeah, these are extraordinary numbers. The E. Jean Carroll case and now this case here in New York, the civil fraud trial. John Karl, our thanks to you. Again, the breaking news at this hour, the judge in this case, Judge Engoron, fining Donald Trump $354 million, just more than $354 million in the civil fraud trial. Each of his sons, Don Jr., Eric, each ordered to pay $4 million for exaggerating the wealth of their business holdings in order to get better loans, to get better insurance policies, the kind of thing that the Attorney General had argued everyday Americans cannot do, and if they do, get in trouble every day for this, and that Donald Trump should not be above the law, was her argument all along. I want to bring in Asha Rangappa, our legal contributor, former special agent, New York Division of the FBI, of course, with Yale. And Asha, I just wanted to ask you, because you heard John Karl mention there, it's obvious this will be appealed. One of the questions that comes to mind, how do you pay for the appeal? Obviously, with all of these other mounting fines that are just sort of extraordinary in just the terms of what kind of money we're talking about here, and how successful would or couldn't appeal in a case like this be?
Yeah, so he's likely to appeal. Now, he would probably have to post a surety bond in order to appeal, which means that they would take a portion of the judgment, maybe 10%, that he has to essentially put up as collateral while the appeal goes on. And if he loses, then that gets automatically forfeited. So in this case, I mean, if you look at, say, 10% of what he owes, $35 million, does he have that to put up? So that's the first hurdle. The second is what would actually be appealed. This was a bench trial, which means that the judge was deciding both questions of fact and questions of law, where normally you might have a jury decide the questions of fact. On appeal, the judge's determinations on those questions of fact are going to be given a lot of deference. So, for example, what his determinations were on the credibility of the witnesses, the fact that he felt, as he said in the order, that he did not believe that Trump or any of the other defendants expressed any remorse. And he believed that that evinced intent to continue to engage in this if he didn't institute any kind of remedy. And then on the legal issue, this was a court of equity, which means that what he was looking at was how to make this fair again, that Trump had been cheating, and how do we compensate New York for this unfairness? So he was disgorging profits, where he was saying all of these ill-gotten gains we need to remove from Trump and give it back to New York. So this is all based on calculations of, interest he got away with not paying, or things that he was able to buy by securing loans or providing false statements. And so it would be, I think, unlikely on appeal for that kind of precise calculation to be in error. The one thing that could have maybe he prevailed on is that the judge initially had canceled all of Trump's business certificates. This is known as the corporate death penalty. It's a very draconian measure. Letitia James had tried this with the NRA, and the judge did not allow it. But this order actually modifies that earlier penalty, and he says, I'm not going to cancel all of the business certificates en masse. We're going to do it on an ad hoc basis as needed by this compliance monitor that's been appointed by the court. So I think this will be pretty steady on appeal, but Trump may try to appeal it.
Asha Rangalpa, court of equity, as she points out, trying to square things, if you will, after years of the judge saying that Donald Trump, his business, his family members who were in business with him, grossly exaggerated the values of what they owned here in New York and beyond in order to secure better deals, better loans, access to loans that perhaps everyday Americans would not get access to unless they exaggerated their wealth and their value as well. Asha, thank you for that. And in fact, Aaron, you and I were talking off camera here about something the judge actually wrote in here about that, fully aware that the argument on the campaign trail is this is an attack, this is a witch hunt, this is political in nature, but the judge lays out why he came up with the numbers that he came up with.
He does, and sometimes he uses colorful language, but he's frank. He said, look, Donald Trump is not Bernie Madoff, the famous, infamous Ponzi schemer. The defendant did not commit murder or arson, but he says Trump's complete lack of contrition and remorse borders on pathological, and crucially, Justice Engoron said this court finds that defendants are likely to continue their fraudulent ways unless the court grants significant injunctive relief. And so he's saying Trump's going to be a recidivist, fraudster, unless the penalty is so severe, $354 million, and a ban from business in New York for the next 3 years is pretty severe. Unless he imposed something that severe, the judge became convinced that Trump would continue to commit fraud and continue to exaggerate his wealth.
But as Asha points out, the judge did not give Letitia James everything that she'd asked for.
She did not, and not quite the amount of money that Letitia James may have been hoping for.
But close.
But it's very, very close.
But on the business certificates?
He did not end up canceling the business certificates as the judge initially had done. And even then, the Attorney General didn't ask him to do that. He sort of freelanced that on his own in a partial summary judgment motion. He takes that back here and instead imposes a monitor over the Trump Organization. So former President Trump's business now has a semi-permanent babysitter. and Trump himself cannot be involved in any of these transactions for the next 3 years.
And as we know, he's in his late 70s, which is, as we know, young and plenty of time to do many things. But in the world of business, to be held off from doing any kind of business here in New York for 3 years, you would think is significant to someone who's made a career and certainly built their career here in New York.
And his kids can't do business for the next 2 years. So the Trump Organization is in flux. And we had thought initially, had the judge gone forward and canceled the business certificates, what would have happened to the Trump name on all the buildings around here? Seems like the name can stay, but the status of the company and who's going to lead it for the next couple of years, that's what's very much in question. And $354 million, David, may well eat up the remaining cash that he has on hand.
And obviously they can put that on hold while they appeal, but they'll have to put up something.
They're going to either have to put up the bond, as Asha says, and there is some interest that could increase the penalty effectively,
right,
or you effectively have to put it all in escrow with the court. And I don't know.
So either way, it ties up the money.
Who's got $354 million lying around?
Certainly no one's here on this desk. Aaron, thank you. I want to bring in Rachel Scott, who covers Capitol Hill and the race for president for us. And Rachel, as John Santucci had pointed out earlier after the headlines, and we've only had one that's as eye-popping as this, and that was the damages after E. Jean Carroll. Now we have $354 million in fines in this case alone for Donald Trump, the civil fraud trial, and the email, the fundraising appeal has gone out.
Just went out just minutes ago, David. So now Donald Trump facing this massive fine. His campaign, the Super PAC, already blasting out an email to his supporters asking for 1 million of them to start to chip in. As we have noted, this is money that the former president is using to pay for his legal fees. $50 million of it went toward that in 2023. In the short term, we have not really seen this impact the former president when it comes to the Republican primary politically. He dominated in Iowa. He dominated in New Hampshire. He's ahead in South Carolina. But when you look at the long term and all that the former president is now facing, 91 criminal charges, multiple trials possibly here ongoing throughout the course of this election, when polls asked voters whether or not they would support the former president if he is convicted, this is where you see Donald Trump start to lose his edge in a head-to-head matchup with President Biden. The biggest shift is among independents. He drops about 11 points. And this is all the more reason why you have rivals like Nikki Haley staying in this race. She says that Americans would not vote for a convicted felon. That's Donald Trump.
Rachel Scott with us here. And of course, those are the trials still yet to come, though today's decision will certainly loom large for Donald Trump himself and his family and the Trump Organization, and whether or not Donald Trump supporters in the country will be swayed by this kind of number and the argument that the judge has made in his decision, which is $354 million isn't an attack. And the judge in his decision lays out why he came up with that number, essentially saying, as Aaron Katersky said a moment ago, making the case that if it weren't a number like this, that this kind of business behavior would in fact continue. Again, Donald Trump fined $354 million. Each of his two eldest sons, Don Jr. and Eric Trump, both fined $4 million each, and all three of them prevented from doing business in New York for the next several years. John Santucci, do we have a reaction from the Trump Organization, from Donald Trump?
David, we have so much reaction. I'm just going to flag an email that literally we all just received from our colleague Avery Harper. Donald Trump, David, already fundraising off of this decision, playing into that conversation that you, me, Rachel Scott, and everyone were just having. The reaction is remarkable coming in right now. The Trump Organization claiming that, this is a miscarriage of justice, that they, of course, plan to appeal. Similar statements from Donald Trump's attorneys, David. And the Trump Organization statement, I believe, written by the two sons, echoing that conversation I had with Eric Trump, that they believe that this was an effort by the Attorney General to go after them personally. They believe that this was a miscarriage of justice. And they maintain, David, they have run a clean business, never missed a payment for any of the loans that they have out with Deutsche Bank and others that were mentioned throughout the proceedings that we saw go on for several weeks and months in downtown. And David, you got to imagine for right now, the question they're trying to figure out is, with that independent arbiter coming in, what happens in the immediate future? But the one thing we do know, and Aaron mentioned this with you a couple seconds ago, the Trump name that is emblazoned on buildings all around New York City, for now remains, David.
You heard those arguments, John Santucci, thank you, from the Trump sons, from the Trump family. The judge says that's simply not the case. The evidence proved otherwise. And again, they were found liable previously. This trial was about the damages and what kind of punishment they would face. Today, we learned it this afternoon that the judge in this civil fraud trial, again, fining Donald Trump, the former president, $354 million, and each of his sons $4 million each, which takes you to about $363 million. The Attorney General, Letitia James, had asked for $370 million. She did not get that number, though the judge came very close. And again, both Donald Trump and his two sons prevented from doing business here in New York for the next couple of years. Our coverage continues on ABC News Live, abcnews.com. For those of you here in the East, many of you have local news starting at 4 o'clock Eastern, and I'll be back with the entire team for World News Tonight a little later today. I'm David Muir in New York. Good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
Works. Brick and I are the only ones that have to know what's going on. We bring Jocelyn into this, she's going to drive my enemies to you.
We know how to be careful.
Okay, I know Jocelyn loves you. She loves her family too. But we involve Jocelyn, it's all for nothing.
Then shoot me!